Okay, so Toxic and I decided that we are going to start our one-off series of tactics for Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000. For those of you who don't know, I'm Hero of the Universe, and joining me as always is Toxic. So we're going to talk about deployment objectives and terrain. So first thing you do is you set up the terrain on the table, correct? So do you want to talk about that first?
Yeah, so in sixth edition, the way they suggest to putting your train is to agree with your opponent and just have like a kind of like a cinematic look to your terrain. But a way that they recommend setting out your terrain would be to basically, if you're playing a 4 by 6 board, you cut the board into 6 squares, and then you roll a d3 in each sector, and then depending on what you roll, that's how much terrain should be placed in each sector. And then you just take it in turns, going back and forth, placing the correct amount of terrain into each sector.
Now, generally, when you play a game, do you pick a general environment from what you're playing in, or do you just kind of pick random terrain pieces based on what's available? I mean, like, well, obviously, what's available to you is a thing, but do you ever do you ever agree on a battlefield? So, like, or do you put like a random building and then some trees and then a hill? Like,
Yeah, I think that's kind of what they get at, is what you should be doing is kind of talking to your opponent and actually getting this like really unique feel for your terrain where you're playing and it actually feels like, this is a world, not this is a table with uh you know some cans and you know some craters and just random stuff over the field. Usually, obviously, you're limited by what you have available to you, but if you go to a local game store, a lot of the time, the one that I go to, they have several tables. They have like grassland, they have an ice world table, urban. So they usually have enough stuff that you can kind of get a nice feel for what you've got.
yeah. Now, I think terrain changed in sixth edition in two different ways. One is you actually buy terrain. You can buy terrain with points. How does that play into the whole thing, in your opinion?
Um, I don't know. From what I've seen, people haven't really been buying it for the terrain and cover, and they more just buy it for the quad gun on the Aegis defense line. So it's really just like buying another gun, and I think I think if they really want to add this and make this into something, they need to release some more stuff because it's basically all just Imperial stuff right now. Personally, I like it, but
Yep. So I got a question because I believe. Hang on, let me just bring up handy dandy rule book here. That when you set up terrain, you do something very similar to fantasy when you actually get properties for each of the terrain. Is that actually a rule you play with more often than not? Like you get a mysterious forest, or you get like.
yeah, I've done things like that a couple of times where we've kind of had rules for certain terrain and where we've had rules on the whole board because you can actually roll to see just what they have stuff in there to actually give you the whole board its own kind of feel where you actually are playing on a planet rather than just a table. So they have like low gravity worlds and stuff like that. I've done that a couple times, but most of the time when I'm playing, I usually just play just generally like that's terrain. Like no one really seems to want to get into much detail with it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a little strange because I remember one time I did a pickup game for 40k, and they're like, okay, now we roll for terrain properties. I'm like, wait, you do that with 40k? And it was just really weird. That kind of, there's like magical forest that like tries to stab space marines. Kind of cool for fantasy. It seems a little out of place for 40k in my opinion. Um, and I definitely more often than not try to create my own rules if we want to do like a certain building is an important thing.
Yeah, like before sixth edition came out, they had um a Death World supplement that came out in a White Dwarf, and they kind of had rules where you would roll for different terrain and stuff like that. But so I kind of felt like that they were testing the idea when that came out, and now it's a thing.
All right, so we talked a bit about terrain. So, do you? Oop, Toxic's talking to his cat. Got crazy toxic. Anyways, so Wow, what was I saying? Now I'm just thinking about your cat and and how it's gonna photobomb this session. But do you think certain terrain and certain environments have certain advantages and disadvantages towards certain armies?
Terrain itself is being, I feel it's being nerfed with especially area of terrain now, and most of the terrain has gone down by at least 1 point of cover, more or less across the board, from what I can tell. Um, it's I was going somewhere with this. Oh yeah, area of terrain. You used to if you were firing through area of terrain, it used to provide a cover save, but now it only provides a cover save if you're actually obscured. It's not just this magical area terrain that you're firing through anymore.
Right, that would be really strange.
Mm. But it used to be because me and Savage, when we used to play area of terrain, we always thought that if you were both in the area of terrain, that you didn't get a cover save. But and all of a sudden we were like versing someone, we're like, yeah, you're both in the area of terrain, you both get a cover save. That was in fifth edition, and we were just like, wait, really? Well, I mean, how does that even work? But yeah, so I don't think that's how it works now. I think you actually have to be obscured to get the cover save if you're firing through area of terrain.
Right, okay, so the next thing we'll talk about is deploying objectives. So talk about those strategies. That's honestly not something that is my super strong point. I mean, generally I just find a piece of terrain in my side of deployment. I'm like, okay, it's mine. So talk about how you kind of place objectives and stuff like that.
Yeah, it really depends on your army because obviously if you're playing an army that doesn't have a lot of shooting, you can't really build your whole deployment around a certain piece of terrain. And with the objectives, again, it just depends on how what type of army you're playing. If you're playing Tyranids and everything is basically close combat, you don't want to place too many objectives in your half because you have to keep one of your units around, sitting on that objective. You really want to kind of think ahead of the game and think, well, where am I going to be moving on the board? I'm going to have to go. This unit has to go after that guy's unit. So maybe I should put an objective over there if I'm going to be going there anyway. You really got to try to think where you want to end up at the end of the game and kind of have your objectives there. Like if you want to play a more defensive role and sit back and shoot, and you're probably not moving for most of the game, like that's where you want to have your objectives.
Right. So that's a bit more important which army you're playing rather than when you're placing terrain. So for example, if you're playing something like Blood Angels, you want to kind of and you're more aggressive. You want to make sure that there are objectives halfway across the board or closer to their deployment zone, so then you can
Hmm.
get any extra points and stuff like that for having units in their deployment zone. Unless you were like Imperial Guard, in which case you're trying to keep all the objectives as far back with your gun line as possible. Is I just remind me real quick, how do objectives work? It's like D3 plus whatever based on the mission.
Yeah, usually it's based on the mission. I think the general one is where are my missions at? You got like Crusade, which is D3 plus two, and then that's and then you got yeah, Big Guns Never Tire again, D3 plus two. So majority of the time you're gonna end up with that D3 plus two objectives.
Right. So, do you have to place them with terrain? Because I've always kind of played that. I'm not sure that's just from a way we played or if it was an actual rule actually. But do you normally have to place objectives in terrain, or can you put them out in the open?
You can put them out in the open. The only rule with placing objectives is I think it's they can't be within. I could be getting these things around the wrong way, but it's 12 inches of a board edge, or no, 6 inches of a board edge, and then 12 inches of another objective. I think that's the only rule. I think what happened in fifth edition is that you could make a piece of terrain
Hmm.
an objective. If you didn't want to have an objective marker, you could just say, well, this terrain is the objective.
Right. I think that's usually how I roll.
Mm. And I think that's just kind of how and having objectives in terrain is it's a good way to kind of remind you that that's what the objective is.
It's more realistic versus this piece of ground. This dirt is significant to my cause. Unlike, oh, this building is important because we need something from it or it will provide us with something. So what you're saying is I can put an objective in my Fortress of Redemption.
Um, I think that would depend on what gets placed down first. If your if the deploy if your army gets put down first, or if I think, yeah, it's been a while since I've used fortifications, but I think you put down your fortifications first, and then the terrain gets put down, and then the objectives. So to say yes, you would.
So I
But
can just put it right on top where they're never going to get it and then laugh at foolish mortals from my perch.
well, there's nothing stopping them from walking into your Fortress of Redemption. They can take it over if they want to.
They can try. Is what you're saying.
Yeah.
So yeah, anything else about objectives kind of thing? Aggressive army should be a bit more careful about it because they want to think about where they are rather than having it on turn one.
Yeah, it's if you're a fast army, you don't really need to worry about where the objectives are so much. If you're a slower army, then yeah, you got to be worrying about kind of how long it's going to take you to get there. So it's people need to think more of about their army and less of like, oh well, let's make it symmetrical. Let's have two on my side, one in the middle, and two on your side. Like it might be fair and that might be symmetrical and look good, but is that really going to be the best tactic for your army to have two in your deployment?
Right. I could see it being kind of, a dick move or something, put an objective like right next to their heavy weapon team or something like that, and there's like, oh, I have to move, but then I lose shooting, and damn it.
Yeah.
So
I think the best way to do is if you're having a friendly game, set the terrain up, make it look like a battlefield. Don't just have random buildings like spread out everywhere. If you're going to have objectives where objectives might be. And I think that's where I've had some of my most fun games, is where we've thought about the terrain layout, we've thought about the deployment, things that should have maybe a special property, give them a special property. If you're going to have a fun game and you're not in a tournament, why not have things a little bit unbalanced for the sake of story?
right.
And I like that would be my recommendation. Like I've played games with my Tyranids where on one side of the board we've set up all the buildings in one spot, and then we've had the only terrain I've kind of had is like craters and maybe some trees, and because it gives it more of a feel like the whoever I'm versing is defending the city from like a swarm of Tyranids.
Right.
So it might not be the best for me because I don't have the higher cover save of the building, but I'm a Tyranid. I don't really want to be going into a building anyway unless there's people to eat it inside.
Right. That definitely is something, but for tournaments they usually do it symmetrical, or do GMs kind of place the objective markers, or do players still do that in tournaments?
I haven't played a tournament in sixth edition, but from what I remember in fifth edition, it's pretty much like you get your little package for the tournament and you get your missions, and you pretty much know where everything's going to be. They more or less tell you that's where it is. So it's you get a little less. It depends on the tournament, obviously, but you get a little less. What's the word? Customization, I guess, on where you want to place your stuff. But again, it depends on the tournament. I've been in ones where you have been able to put your own objectives down. I've also been in ones where the objectives have been set and I couldn't move them.
All right, let's talk a bit about secondary objectives then. So these kind of things are slay the warlord, first blood. If you have people in their deployment zone, right? Those are all secondary. Am I missing any major ones?
I think there's three. Yeah, first blood, the slay the warlord, and then I don't know what it's called, but it's the one where you have to get in their deployment zone with a scoring or denial unit.
So you can march in with a non-troop choice and they can still score for deployment, or
As far as I can tell, it just has to be a denial unit. It's yeah. As far as I can tell, I mean, I could find it here, but I don't know. When I want to find it, I won't find it.
yeah, fair enough. So
Okay, here it is. It's if at the end of the game you have at least one model from one or more scoring or denial units in the enemy's deployment zone, you score one victory point. Units that are falling back or have gone to ground do not count.
All right. So, do you want to talk about your strategies with that? How important are these things you should be focusing on throughout the game as much as your regular objectives, or are these kind of things that?
For this one, it really depends on the mission. For instance, I played a game today against Seb, and we were playing uh, Relic. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, the Relic, and that's one objective right in the middle. That thing's worth 3 points right there. And so the big goal for this mission was just to get those 3 points from the middle objective. Whereas if you got all three of the side objectives, that's 3 points there. You can tie the game by just getting the side objectives and uh, not letting your opponent get any and just capturing the relic. At the end of that game, what ended up happening was no one had the relic, and I won just because I had Slay the Warlord and the one where I had a model in the deployment zone. So it really depends because like you get a lot of other missions where you have a lot more objectives, and if you have 5 objectives and they're all worth I think one each, then you're it's not so much of a big deal because there's so much more points you can score elsewhere.
Right. So, again, kind of, is this something to consider not as a 40k player, but you need to look deeper into your army? Because I can kind of picture myself as a Dark Angel. My warlord's Belial with precise shots, and I'm fighting a Tau Ethereal, and I can just shoot him in the face twice and get an objective. Versus he'll probably have to put a lot of power into this. So, I mean, is there any sort of recommendations you give for people with like weaker warlords to dodge and stuff like that, or perhaps people that aren't the best at defending their deployment zones? Because I mean, if you're Tyranids and you're running around, I mean, you're not going to have anything that.
Yeah, definitely. It's really one of those things where you kind of got to look at what you're going to be giving up versus what you can get. If you're kind of like a Tyranid player and it's kind of hard to keep your guys back to defend your deployment zones, and it's easy for them to run a troop choice just to score that point, you kind of got to look at like, well, I'm probably going to give up that, but my HQ is really tough. It's going to be hard to take him down, and I can probably kill his HQ pretty decently, so that kind of evens it out. First Blood might be a little bit harder for Tyranids as well because you have those soft, squishy troop choices. So that's another thing. You could be looking at this and going, well, I might be 2 points down by the time I get into this. That keeping my Warlord alive might be the toughest, the best thing I can do. So that's definitely something that you have to look at because they can come back and bite you at the end of the game when you don't realize how many points your opponent actually has when you start looking at these secondary objectives.
Right. Okay. So, moving on to deployment then.
Yeah, I just last words on that would be that they've definitely done it because in fifth edition there was a lot of draws. I think more often than not you would find a game would end up being a draw just because they didn't have those secondary objectives. So it's yeah. So it's really good. It helps there be less draws.
Yeah, definitely, and it's something I'd probably consider. I mean, especially if you're something like Chaos, like if you were Chaos, you pretty much want to try to slay the Warlord because you get your gift of mutation and then all that other stuff. So it's definitely
Yeah.
I definitely think it's also based on the army as well. So yeah, moving on to deployment. So let's talk about Dawn of War. Toxic was kind enough to take some screen caps from Vassell on what they look like. So do you want to talk a bit about Dawn of War and strategies with that?
Yeah. So Dawn was basically what Pitch Battle used to be in fifth edition. You get the whole 12-inch deployment, um, and or it's like 12 inches back. Whatever it is, it works out the same. Um, the biggest things I find when playing like this is you have a lot of room to spread out your guys, and you really have to think about because a lot of people that fall into the trap where they're like, well, I have all this area, so I should stretch out my army. And the problem that you get with that is if you stretch out an army too thin, people can break through your lines really quickly and just run amok anywhere they want to. So you really got to think of, you got so much room to deploy. Maybe it's better to just deploy in one corner. Maybe it's better to deploy in a big straight line. It's definitely one of the ones where sometimes I prefer going second just so I can see how the other guy's deploying, and I can kind of counter his deployment with mine. Because unlike fantasy, you can't really like in fantasy how deploy one, I deploy one.
Yep.
It's a bit easier to counter that. But when that is dropping down their force, it's a bit harder. So
Right.
it's yeah.
Right. I actually think the deployment is actually a bit more interesting, especially what turn order you get. Because in fantasy, if you deploy first, you're just getting +1 to roll. But if you go first, it when you win the roll, it can be tough because you're saying, well, yeah, I can go first, get my first round of shooting and stuff like that. I can get that first blood objective that we talked about, so that's instantly, you
Hmm.
know, a thing you can get just for rolling higher than your opponent. But at the same time, you can also sit back and just kind of counterattack that. If he groups all his guys into one place, into like one hill, I'm just gonna stack my plasma cannons so they're in range turn one.
Yeah, it's definitely in the game I played with Seb today. Like he chose to go second because he wanted to counter my deployment, and in the long run, he did more than just that because I had this really, I had my Thunderwolf Cavalry HQ with some Fenrisian wolves right in the middle, and I have a 12-inch move with a possible 12-inch charge. If I had first turn, there was no way I was going to reach him. But if I had let him have first turn, he would have moved up, not being able to reach me, and then I would have been able to potentially charge him on my first turn, rather than what I had to do was move up 6 inches, and that way he wouldn't get to me, and then he would move up, and then I would charge him. So I kind of had to, you know, shuffle around a little bit just because I had first turn. So it was good that I got to, you know, have first turn, but kind of worked against me in the long run.
Yeah, and keep in mind for any of our viewers, this is before the game even starts. These are all tactics before the game even starts. All right. So anything else on Dawn of War, or should we move on to the?
Um, yeah, not really. Just it's simple. It's you don't have to really think too much about it. Just be careful of how thin you spread your units. That's about it.
Yep. And to any of our viewers who are newer players, generally, when somebody's teaching you to play the game, they'll teach you through Dawn of War because it's just it's usually the most simple. All right.
Yeah.
So moving on to Hammer and Anvil, correct?
Is that haven't
That's
seen the picture pop up yet, so
yeah. It's
yep, that's Hammer and
long
Anvil.
table edges. All right. So talk a bit about this one.
This one can cause some trouble for close combat armies if you're versing a shooting army because uh, they can deploy so far back, and it's not really that much of a big deal when you look at it. You kind of have more or less the same amount of board to cover because you have more to deploy in. But I did have a situation where I was playing my Tyranids, and like you look at that picture now, and it's like, well, yeah, you can just deploy all the way out to the line, but if there's a piece of terrain there, and you're playing a 2,000 point army, you might not be able to fit them all right up at the line. And I was playing a shooting army, so they went all the way back, and I had a lot of way to walk. It's it's different. I wasn't expecting this when 6th edition came out, and it's basically has the same kind of things as Dawn of War, but you don't have as much room to spread your guys out, so it's a lot easier to kind of counter. Not, but yeah, not much to say on that one because I haven't really played it that much so far.
Yep. But you would say that assaulty armies have somewhat of a disadvantage in this type thing. So maybe keep more in reserve, or if you have a chance to deep strike some units, it would be a bit wiser to keep them.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't gone over how far it actually is, but just like looking at it, you can. It
Uh,
just looks like if someone deployed right at the end, you would be kind of
yeah.
in trouble.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. The distance between the two deployment zones is 24 inches. So if somebody went all the way up to the front and you had those wolves, you could potentially charge turn one.
Hmm.
So, which is it's the same as Dawn of War. Yeah, it's always 12 inches.
But if you go back, how far like in
Yeah.
is that? Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting deployment. It's kind of the reason why I like it is if you deploy your terrain up and then you roll that deployment, it kind of just it makes it feel a little bit different the way you're playing through
Hmm.
the different sides.
Yeah.
The only downside I find with this is that a lot of if you're playing at Games Workshop or a local store and they have smaller boards, is this only makes sense on a 6x4. If you're playing on a 4x4, it's the same as a pitch battle.
Right, and I was gonna say at Games Workshop they usually have the tables connected together, so you have to like go and deploy your left side, then you have to walk around the table, go deploy your right side.
Yeah, usually we don't even bother with that because the tables that we played at Games Workshop were only 4x4 anyway, unless you were the only one in there. So if you're playing a 4x4 table and you roll this, you might as well just make it easier for yourself and just say that it's pitch battle.
All right, so anything else about Hammer and Anvil?
Yeah, not really. It's a bit more difficult to play, like you said, depending on the table that you're playing on. You might not have the access to walk around on that side. Um, it's yeah, nothing really to say on that one.
All right.
It's pretty straightforward.
All right, so let's talk about, in my opinion, the most interesting one, the Vanguard Strike, which is diagonal, still 24 inches in no man's land. So what do you have to say about Vanguard Strike?
I really like this one. It's taken over what it used to be table quarters. So it's kind of the same thing but kind of different. Um, it's again terrain. Depending on how you set it up, it could screw you over a little bit if you've deployed the terrain thing and it's going to be a pitch battle. It gives you a lot of variety and where you're going to be deploying your models. I think I think all in all they're all very similar in that if you spread your army too thin, it could be difficult, and if you uh, clump, you also could be difficult depending on who you're versing. But this I think this one gives you a lot of variety because you don't have much of a backfield. You've got because it kind of ends in a triangle, and you have more of a the front line is more open. Um, I enjoy playing this. It's just a nice, interesting way to kind of have a game and kind of refresh playing 40k. If you haven't played 40k in sixth edition, it's a nice way to get back into it playing this way.
Right, I definitely think this is the most interesting because it's kind of like that combination of it's too wide or too far back or something like that. I personally like, and also this is something you know with these different deployment types. It's obviously important that to an extent you don't try to place terrain as if you're going to be playing Dawn of War. You know what I mean? Because I think a lot
Hmm.
of people still kind of do that. Like they think they're gonna get Dawn of War, so they're putting stuff on their side, and then I end up.
Yeah.
So anything else to talk about while we're doing
Yeah.
this tactics thing?
Well, me and Seb, because I had a map already loaded up from that was a pitch battle, and well, Dawn of War, and we we ended up rolling Hammer and Anvil, and it was kind of strange because the map was clearly deployed for pitch battle, but it turned it into a more interesting fight. We kind of had to think a little bit about where we would deploy because we had only like a building and a half on each side, so it was
Nice, nice. So if that's gonna be it, this is our one-off tactics show. I guess we're gonna do it kind of spontaneous from now on. There's gonna be no set schedule when we're gonna do it. So yeah, if anybody has any questions on tactics or anything, I know people have been asking us for tactics since like day one of the Hammer. We're gonna try and do it. Toxic, you're gonna still do your tactics show on specific units, correct? And this is
yeah. I'm gonna have like just on specific units. That again, that's not gonna have a set time either. It might be two a week. One week there might be none, depending on what I'm doing. But I'm gonna just do it on random units unless someone sends me a message saying, I want to hear about this.
right. So this is by no means gonna be like a Sunday night and replacing the old Hammer. This is just kind of we feel like it kind of thing. So yeah, if oh, also, Dice Troop is now accepting donations for anyone who likes what we're doing. We have a donate button on the bottom of our blog. We are currently working on our Facebook group, right?
Um, yeah, slowly.
Slowly but surely, we're a little afraid to leave Tumblr entirely, but we're trying to expand our viewers and stuff like that. So, yep, if you go to the blog dicetroop.tumblr, if you scroll to the bottom, we have a donate button. Anything that you can donate would be greatly appreciated because Toxic and I, we put a lot of time and money into this to bring stuff for our viewers. So, yeah, anything else you want to say, Toxic? What are you working on?
Last thing I want to say is just more Vassal really. Don't If you want to get in on it, we will offer our services and teaching people how to get it. It's a great system. I wouldn't mind doing maybe some weekly kind of battle reports over that. So it'd be good to get some new people and just kind of having games.
Yep, there are definitely that people want to do it, but it's a bit difficult to get everyone organized, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah, it's not as confusing as what it looks. It's once you really get that it installed and you kind of figure it out, it's just so easy.
Yeah, like I said, it was my third time getting onto it today to play that small skirmish with Seb before the servers crashed. But yeah, I was able to figure out everything pretty well. So yeah, if and then also Blood Bowl League, maybe we'll be live streaming my game against Other Rob tonight. I don't know.
Yeah, and we've like all the spots for the league is are full, but people are still playing, and it just because we the league is full, put open, send some challenges in if you look for a game, and if this one goes well, maybe we'll set up another one.
Oh yeah. All right. So yep, that'll be it. I hope you all have a wonderful evening and good night.